There's a creature moving through total darkness that no human has ever seen alive. Not photographed alive, not filmed alive, not observed alive by a single living person in the history of our species. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. If a fishing trawler pulled that creature up in its net tomorrow, hauled it up through 3 kilometers of freezing black water towards sunlight for the first time in its existence, it would very likely be dead before it ever broke the surface. Not from the fall, not from suffocation, from something far stranger. Its own body would come apart from the inside, undone by the simple act of rising. And this is not science fiction. This has happened over and over again on fishing boats and research vessels for over a century. Sailors have hauled up fish with eyes bulging grotesquely out of their sockets, stomachs pushed out through their own mouths, swollen and unrecognizable, dead within minutes of ever seeing light. For decades, almost nobody understood exactly why. And what we have slowly pieced together since is one of the strangest, least talked about mysteries in the entire ocean. Because it turns out that the deep sea is not simply a place. It is a different physical law, and nothing that belongs down there can survive up here in our world, breathing our air, existing at our pressure. This is a story about what lies at the bottom of the ocean, why almost nothing that lives there can ever be brought up to us alive, and why scientists believe the single fact means that the vast majority of life in the deep sea remains completely unknown and possibly unknowable to human eyes. Let's start with a number that should stop you in your tracks. More than 80% of our own ocean has never been mapped, explored, or seen by human eyes, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Not 80% of some distant, irrelevant patch of water. 80% of the ocean on our own planet, the planet we have lived on for our entire existence as a species. We have better maps of the surface of Mars, a planet 140 million miles away, than we have of the seafloor beneath our own oceans. Think about that. We have sent rovers, cameras, and satellites to photograph nearly every crater on a world no human has ever set foot on. And yet the deepest trenches on our own planet remain darker to us, more unmapped, more mysterious than the surface of another world. Why? Because getting there is almost impossible, and because even when we do get there, the things we find often cannot survive the journey back. To understand why, you have to understand what pressure actually means at those depths, because the way most people picture it is wrong. We tend to imagine the deep ocean as simply really deep water. Heavier somehow, but water all the same. The reality is closer to being crushed by an invisible mountain. At the surface, you are living under 1 atmosphere of pressure, the normal weight of the air above you, something your body is so used to that you never notice it at all. Descend into the ocean, and for every 10 meters you go down, you add another full atmosphere of pressure. By the time you reach 2,000 meters, roughly 1.25 miles beneath the waves, the pressure has increased to around 200 atmospheres. Keep descending toward the deepest points on Earth, the trenches that plunge past 10,000 meters, and the pressure climbs past 1,000 atmospheres. To put that in terms your body can actually understand, it would be like having the weight of 50 jumbo jets stacked directly on top of you, pressing down on every square inch of your skin at once. A human being would be crushed instantly and completely at those depths. There would be nothing left resembling a body at all, and yet life thrives there. Not survives in some diminished, barely clinging on way. Thrives. Entire ecosystems of animals that have never known sunlight, never known anything but crushing pressure and absolute cold and total darkness, living out full lives, hunting, reproducing, dying, generation after generation, in conditions that would obliterate you or me in seconds. How is that possible? This is where the real mystery begins, because the answer is stranger than most people expect. These creatures are not surviving the pressure by being tougher than us. They are surviving it because, unlike us, almost their entire body is made of something that pressure simply cannot crush: water. Most deep-sea organisms are composed overwhelmingly of water and soft tissue, and water, unlike air, is essentially incompressible. You cannot squeeze it into a smaller space, no matter how hard you press. So, when a deep-sea creature's entire body is water through and through with no significant pockets of air or gas anywhere inside it, the crushing pressure of the deep ocean has almost nothing to push against. The pressure outside the animal and the pressure inside the animal are equal, perfectly balanced against each other, and so the creature simply exists, suspended in that balance, untouched by forces that would turn a human being into pulp. This is precisely why the story of the deep sea's most infamous creature is not what most people think it is. You have almost certainly seen a photograph of the blobfish, the droopy, sagging, gelatinous creature that has been mockingly crowned the world's ugliest animal in meme after meme, article after article. Here is what almost none of those articles ever explain properly. The blobfish you have seen in photographs is not what a blobfish actually looks like. Not really. In its natural habitat, roughly 600 to 1,200 meters down off the coast of Australia and Tasmania, the blobfish looks like a fairly ordinary, if slightly odd, deep-sea fish, firm-bodied, recognizably fish-shaped. It survives at that depth precisely because its flesh is a low-density gelatinous substance, slightly less dense than water itself, which allows it to hover near the ocean floor without expending much energy swimming, in an environment where food is scarce and every calorie matters. But the moment that same fish is hauled up in a trawler's net, dragged from the crushing pressure of its natural depth to the near vacuum of surface pressure by comparison, that gelatinous flesh, no longer supported by the surrounding water pressure it evolved for, collapses in on itself. It sags, it droops. It becomes, quite literally, an entirely different shape than the one it wore its entire life. The famous photograph that made the blobfish an internet joke is not a picture of what the blobfish is. It is a picture of what pressure loss does to a creature's body. It is a photograph of decompression, mistaken by millions of people for a species. But the blobfish, as strange as its story is, actually represents one of the more survivable cases. Because the blobfish, lacking almost any internal gas pockets, is at least structurally intact when it reaches the surface. Deformed, yes. Sagging, yes, but not torn apart. The real horror stories come from deep-sea fish that do have even a small gas-filled space inside them, most commonly a swim bladder, the internal organ many fish use to control their buoyancy. And this is where the physics turns genuinely gruesome. As one of these fish is pulled upward, the pressure surrounding it drops continuously, and the gas trapped inside that swim bladder does what all gas does when the pressure around it decreases. It expands. Not gently, dramatically. By the time a deep water fish reaches the surface from even a few hundred meters down, the gas inside it may have expanded to many times its original volume, and it has nowhere to go. Fishermen have documented this condition, known as barotrauma, for as long as commercial deepwater fishing has existed. The swim bladder swells so violently that it pushes the fish's stomach up and out through its own mouth. The eyes, unable to equalize with the surrounding pressure, drop fast enough, bulge outward from their sockets, sometimes to a genuinely disturbing degree. Fish brought up from significant depths have been documented with their internal organs visibly displaced, their bodies bloated and misshapen in ways that look almost nothing like the animal that existed just minutes earlier at depth. This is not an occasional freak occurrence. It is the routine, expected outcome of bringing up gas-bearing fish from deep water too quickly. So well known and so common that some fishing and conservation programs have developed specialized descending devices, specifically designed to return surviving fish back down to depth fast enough to save their lives before the internal damage becomes fatal. Now here is where the mystery deepens even further, because pressure alone does not fully explain why so many deep-sea creatures cannot survive the trip to the surface. Researchers who have spent careers studying this exact question have found something more unsettling. Many deep-sea organisms that have no gas-filled spaces at all, no swim bladder, nothing that should expand or rupture, still die when brought to the surface, and pressure change by itself is often not the primary killer. The real culprit, according to marine biologists who specialize in deep-sea physiology, is frequently temperature. Deep-sea animals live in water that hovers barely above freezing, often between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius, in an environment of total unchanging stability. Their entire cellular machinery, every enzyme, every protein, every membrane in their bodies, has spent countless generations adapting to function exclusively within that narrow, frigid, high-pressure range. Pull one of these animals up through the water column, and even if you could somehow protect it from pressure change entirely, the temperature shift alone as it rises through progressively warmer water layers can be enough to catastrophically disrupt its internal chemistry. Enzymes that only function correctly at near-freezing temperatures under enormous pressure begin to fail as conditions shift. Cell membranes, engineered by evolution for one specific set of environmental conditions, become unstable outside them. Scientists have identified specific compounds, most notably a molecule called TMEO, trimethylamine N-oxide, that appear to concentrate in the tissues of deep-sea creatures specifically to protect their proteins from being crushed and distorted by pressure, and the concentration of this protective compound increases the deeper an animal lives. It is, essentially, a biochemical armor evolved over millions of years, engineered for one specific and extreme environment, and it stops working the moment that environment changes. This is precisely why so much of what we think we know about deep-sea creatures is built not on observation of the living animal, but on the study of corpses, or worse, complete guesswork. Consider the giant squid, one of the most legendary and feared creatures in the history of seafaring, a creature described in maritime folklore for centuries as a monster capable of dragging entire ships beneath the waves. For most of scientific history, humanity's entire understanding of the giant squid came exclusively from two sources: carcasses that washed up on beaches or floated to the surface already dead, and the scarred remains found inside the stomachs of sperm whales, evidence of titanic battles that had taken place in complete darkness thousands of meters below, witnessed by no human being. Scientists studied dead tissue, preserved specimens, and beak fragments for well over a century, constructing their entire understanding of one of the ocean's most iconic animals from evidence of its death, rather than any observation of its life. It was not until 2012, in a joint expedition involving Japanese researchers and an international television crew, that a giant squid was filmed alive in its natural deep-sea habitat for the very first time in recorded human history. Not caught, not brought to the surface. Filmed exactly where it lived, using a specially designed, unobtrusive deep-sea camera system precisely because researchers understood that hauling a creature like this up to a research vessel would very likely destroy it before it could ever be properly studied alive. Think about what that timeline actually means. Sailors have been telling stories about this creature since before recorded history. Scientists have been formally studying its remains since the 1800s. And it took until 2012, within the lifetime of most people watching this right now, for a single living giant squid to finally be seen by human eyes in the place it actually calls home. The megamouth shark tells an even stranger version of the same story, because unlike the giant squid, this was not a creature woven into ancient legend. It was a species that simply did not exist, as far as science was concerned, until November of 1976, when a USPA Navy research vessel accidentally snagged one in its anchor gear off the coast of Hawaii. A shark reaching lengths of over 5 meters, weighing over a ton, had somehow remained completely unknown to modern science until the final quarter of the 20th century. Since that first accidental discovery, only a small number of megamouth sharks have ever been documented by humans in any capacity, and sightings of the species alive and swimming in its natural deep-water habitat remain exceptionally rare events, each one significant enough to make international news among marine biologists. A 5-meter shark. Not a microscopic organism easily overlooked, an animal roughly the length of a small bus, and it took until 1976 for our species to even confirm it existed, and it remains, to this day, one of the least observed large animals on the entire planet. And these are only the creatures we happen to know the names of. Consider what that actually implies about everything we do not know the names of. If a shark the size of a bus can remain completely undiscovered until 1976, and a giant squid, a creature with a documented history of sightings and legends stretching back centuries, was not filmed alive until 2012, what does that tell you about the smaller creatures? The ones that never wash up on beaches whole, the ones too fragile to survive the trip upward even as a recognizable corpse. Marine biologists studying the deep sea using remotely operated vehicles and specialized deep diving submersibles have documented case after case of animals that appear to be entirely unknown to science, filmed briefly on camera in the crushing dark, and then simply never seen again. Some of these creatures have never been successfully captured or brought to the surface at all, either because attempts to collect them destroyed the specimen entirely, or because the technology to safely retrieve something that delicate from that depth simply does not exist yet. There are documented instances of deep-sea organisms that essentially dissolve or disintegrate during the ascent process, their bodies structurally incapable of maintaining any form once removed from the specific pressure and temperature conditions they evolved within, meaning that, in the truest sense, some deep-sea creatures may be effectively unobservable using current retrieval methods. We can see them through a camera lens for a few fleeting seconds and never hold or study them at all. This is not to say that scientists have simply given up on ever studying these animals properly. Some of the most fascinating engineering in modern oceanography exists specifically to solve this exact problem. Research submersibles like the famous Alvin, operated by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and specialized pressurized collection chambers have been engineered specifically to allow scientists to bring certain deep-sea organisms to the surface while keeping them alive by trapping them at depth inside sealed containers that maintain the crushing pressure of their home environment throughout the entire ascent, essentially creating a portable slice of the deep ocean that travels with the animal all the way to the laboratory. Researchers have successfully kept deep-sea snails, giant isopods, certain crustaceans, and even some deep-water cephalopods alive using exactly this method, carefully maintaining both the pressure and the near-freezing temperature the animal requires. But this technology is expensive, limited in scale, and simply cannot be deployed for every organism at every depth across an ocean this vast. For the overwhelming majority of deep-sea life, at the overwhelming majority of depths, no such technology has ever reached them, which means the overwhelming majority of what actually lives down there remains entirely undocumented, existing only as brief, ghostly appearances on the cameras of remotely operated vehicles before vanishing back into darkness that no human presence will ever follow them into. There is something almost poetic and deeply unsettling about this fact, if you sit with it for a moment. We live on a planet where the ocean covers more than 70% of the surface, where the vast majority of all livable space on Earth by volume exists not on land at all, but in the deep, dark, crushing water beneath the waves. And yet the overwhelming majority of that space and everything living within it remains a genuine unknown. Not because we lack curiosity, but because the very act of trying to look closely at it often destroys the thing we are trying to see. Every deep-sea creature that dies the moment it reaches the surface is, in a very real sense, keeping a secret that it cannot help but keep. It is not hiding from us out of instinct or evasion. It is simply incapable of existing in the same world we do. The camera captures a shape, a movement, a flash of bioluminescence in the dark, and then the moment passes. And whatever that creature was, whatever behaviors it had, whatever role it played in an ecosystem we barely understand, disappears back into a darkness we cannot follow it into without extraordinary and expensive engineering that most of the ocean has simply never received. So the next time you see a viral photograph of some strange, sagging, bulging deep-sea fish hauled up onto the deck of a fishing boat with its eyes pushed out and its stomach turned inside out, understand what you're actually looking at. You're not looking at a monster. You're not looking at what that creature actually is. You're looking at the final few minutes of an animal that spent its entire existence in one of the most extreme environments on the planet. An environment so specific and so unforgiving that the simple act of rising toward the surface, toward light, toward us, was enough to unmake it completely. Somewhere below the waves right now in the deepest, darkest, most crushing regions of our own planet's oceans, there are creatures moving through the black that no living human has ever seen, may never see, and might not even be capable of seeing without destroying the very thing we are trying to study. We have mapped the surface of a planet 140 million miles away in greater detail than the floor of our own oceans. We know more about the dust of Mars than we know about what lives less than a few miles beneath the boats we sail every day. And that, more than any sea monster myth, more than any legend passed down by frightened sailors centuries ago, might be the single most unsettling truth about the ocean that surrounds us. It is not empty down there. It is full of life, full of behavior, full of ecosystems functioning exactly as they have for millions of years, completely indifferent to our existence, utterly invisible to us, protected not by depth alone, but by a simple, brutal physical truth. Whatever lives down there belongs down there, and the moment it doesn't, it stops existing in any form we would recognize at all.